came to Roots and Branches very broken. A lot of years of brokenness. A childhood of abandonment, abuse, neglect.
For the first time, we were at a really low point in our marriage. It hit really rock bottom.
I was ready to quit the ministry and say, bye-bye, it's time to go now.
I was really in a dark place. I had suffered 2 miscarriages. I was attempting suicide. I was really in a dark place, and I needed a change. I needed something different.
I was super nervous going into my first time. It was really hard to get me to even agree to go in.
It wasn't what I expected.
You don't know what to expect. So going into this, I was like, okay, Lord, what's going to happen? But as soon as I walked through the door, it was a level of peace that just came over me.
I don't like opening up very much, but when I got there, I found it very easy to be vulnerable.
I spent some time talking with the prayer team, and then we spent time praying, and the Lord gave me images, and then we asked the Lord what those images meant, and it inevitably seems to lead to something that I agreed about in my childhood. And then the Lord speaks truth to those areas, and they get healed. And then usually for me, there's kind of a closure of the image that started the process, the visit, and I walk out with a new belief and identity in Christ.
He took me back to being a little girl, and I kept wanting to bring him back to the adult perspective, and he kept taking me back to being a little girl. And at one point in time, he usually walks with me on a trail in the woods, and we were walking on this path, and all of a sudden he sits down in the dirt, in the leaves, and he pulls out a game of jacks. And I'm thinking, what is he doing? Because I haven't thought about jacks since I was a little girl. And we played jacks for a while, and I'm asking him questions. And finally, at one point, I felt like the Lord was saying to me, I want to build trust with you again, and I want to tender your heart like your little girl heart should have been tended to when you were a little girl.
One of the key sessions for me was when the Lord showed me a picture of a storm and a lot of boats in the storm. And I was up in a lighthouse, and I could see all of the boats, and I wanted to help them all, and I was mad at the Lord for not stopping the storm and not helping them. And when I was able to zoom in on the boat, and specifically David in a boat, I was able to see that the Lord was using the storm to help David grow, and that it wasn't what I thought from far away was that it was a tragedy, but David was enjoying it and learning how to master the storm.
You're not religious. You don't, come across, with, scriptures.
It's not people prophesying over you. It's not anything spooky or weird. It's really just taking the time, setting it aside, listening to God, and having help with that. Having people sort of nudge you in the right direction, asking questions at the right moments that really help you get into the presence of God, really help you to listen and to receive from Him. And that's just plain different, because it's really it puts all the burden on God.
Was surprising, in one of our healing moments, a memory came up of an abortion that I had when I was 20 years old. There was protesters and everything back in that, this is in 1980. And, the church was, saying, don't kill your baby and all of that. And so me and my boyfriend, went through the crowd to get to the clinic. But I noticed Jesus was there with me. When you ask, where was Jesus? He walked right through the crowd and sat right in the clinic with me. And when I laid down, getting ready to have this procedure done, the most amazing thing happened of forgiveness. He loved me, and he stood, at the end of the table, where the gurney table, and while this procedure was happening, I had this vision that just as Peter, that represented the church, that cut the ear off of the soldier because he was so angry, Jesus put the ear back on the soldier's head. Well, he did the same thing for my little girl. He put all of her parts back together and said, I love you. He was just sitting there loving on me and wasn't judging me. But I didn't forgive myself. I love Jesus today more than anything in the world, that he was with me in that clinic.
It's a way to get healing in a deep way that would take a long time if you try to hunt down the right therapist or various things. It's just being able to meet with the Lord in a safe place and hear what the Father's heart is. It's kind of like a spiritual emergency room.
Super easy, a place where I could be comfortable, felt safe.
Roots and Branches is a safe place to bring things into the light.
It was just very warm and loving and very safe. You can say anything that comes to mind, anything that you kept secret for all these years. There is no condemnation, no shame.
What's different in my life now with my Roots and Branches experience is a level of freedom that I've never experienced. Freedom from past hurts. I finally recognize what bondage is and how to be free from that bondage. Healthy relationships, peace. That's probably the biggest thing that I've achieved now, peace.
I'm a different person. I'm stronger, I'm more courageous, I'm more confident of his love for me. I'm happier now than I've ever been, and that's just coming off of great losses. That's unexplainable.
Thank you, Roots and Branches. You guys got me out of the pit.
Roots and Branches is a kind of a thing that is a really good, like a spiritual cleansing and like a regular thing to do. We could be honest and real, and I think that's what young people are looking for. I think people of different orientations, that's what they're looking for. I really want to encourage leaders to come. We gotta stop this crazy thinking that we have to be perfect.
It's really good for trauma healing.
If you're ready for a change, if you're ready for a different level of healing, a different level of breakthrough, definitely come to Roots and Branches. After a session with them, you'll never be the same.
Welcome to an evening with Bradley Jersak and Felicia Murrell. I'm Susan Carson. I'm an author, speaker, podcaster, and most relevant for our time this evening, I'm the founder and director of Roots and Branches Network, a nonprofit in Cincinnati, Ohio. We have an amazing conversation ahead of us, but before we get to that, in the spirit of full disclosure, I want you to know this is our annual fundraiser. Your gifts tonight and in the days to come are the fuel that allow us to do what we do. So what do we do? Roots and Branches create safe space for transformational encounters through listening prayer, spiritual practices, and soul care. For over 10 years, we've had the honor of meeting with hundreds of people and journeying with them in deep and lasting healing and restoration of the souls. And this has possibly never been more needed than it is now in these days and times that we live in. We support our clients with scholarships and discounted services to make what we offer accessible to all. So your gifts really do allow healing to happen. And if you take a moment, even now, and take a deep breath and listen to your own heart, you might notice a weariness. You might even be aware of pain or wounding that you've been carrying. And these are the places where we're honored to meet with people. So thank you for considering a gift. If you'd like to do that, even right now, you can click on the button below, or you can go to our website, rootsandbranchesnetwork.com/give. There you'll also find lots more information about what we do. You'll find our resources there as well. I want to give a special thanks to our sponsors who have helped underwrite this event tonight. And you'll see their names here right next to this live stream. So thanks again for considering a gift. And thanks so much for joining us tonight. Let's get to the good stuff. I'd love to introduce our guests. Felicia Murrell is a certified life coach and spiritual companion. As a former ordained pastor, she has over 20 years in church leadership experience and now serves the global community with a message of integration and inclusion. Felicia is the author of the book Truth Encounters and a regular speaker with Open Table Conference, along with her friends Bradley Jersak, Paul Young, and many other amazing speakers, theologians, and authors. Dr. Bradley Jersak is a theologian, author of multiple books, speaker and dean of master's studies at St. Stephen's University, where I'm currently a student. And yes, I have some work due there. He's husband to Eden and a very proud grandpa, as you'll see readily in his Instagram feed. He's also been one of the most important voices in the renewal, recreation, and reconstruction of my own faith. Tonight, we're talking about his new book, Out of the Embers, Faith After the Great Deconstruction, which is available for pre-order and releases in November. Let's welcome Bradley and Felicia. So welcome, Felicia Murrell, Bradley Jersak. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
I'm so happy. My pleasure.
Elated to be with you.
Two of my favorite humans here together. And we are talking tonight about this word.
Yes. Thank you.
Last 10 plus years of this process of deconstruction, I really want to find another better word, and maybe we'll talk about that some this evening. As things have been a bit unraveling for me, and there's a lot of unknowing going on, a lot of releasing things that I held dear and true before, entering into a lot of undefined space, and then a lot of new discovering and new opening. One of the quotes, I guess, that has stayed with me through this whole period was from an interview I heard with John Philip Newell, a Celtic thinker and leader. And he talked about when you see turbulence in yourself or in the world, move towards it because something is trying to be born, something is waiting to emerge. And so I've been watching and waiting, for what's emerging, hopefully, in the world and in myself. And often it still looks a lot like a mess and a lot of undoing versus doing. So I think this is super timely and helpful for people because I think there is an intention in this that we often are missing or have missed. So having said that and sort of laid that as at least the framework that I come to this with, I think it's important as we start, even as we use that word, to say what we mean when we say that word. So Felicia, when we talk about deconstruction, what does that mean, or what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Susan, and thank you for asking it up front, because a lot of times we can be talking about something and the pictures don't match. So it's important that we at least can articulate what our picture is when we're using it. And I think for me, when I think of deconstruction, I'm talking about releasing our grip from our attachment from ideas, beliefs, and theories that we once thought to be true. You use the word unknowing. I love that, unknowing and unraveling. It's deconstruction for me would be unknowing things that I've erected or built. Um, it would be a dismantling of all conceptual constructs. And to use a phrase that my teacher, Mirabai Starr, would say, she always says, is when she says disintegration, but when the religious scaffolding crumbles and we are plunged into radical unknowing. And so when I think about her words, what comes to mind for me is the image of Samson at the end of his life when he is standing on the portico and he pushes on the two middle pillars of the house and it falls down and everything collapses around, and it upends everything. And it, for me, when I see that picture personally, I think about those two middle pillars being my personal pillar of arrogance and certitude. And those are the things that were, fallen over. And, surely that even the picture of Samson is one more of destruction than necessarily deconstruction. But as it goes for some people, I think there is a sense of a kind of a catastrophic death that happens with deconstruction that's worth at least acknowledging. And I think sometimes we have to have that kind of catastrophic death. So that's what deconstruction means for me.
It's a powerful picture, Felicia. I'm going to hold that picture, those two pillars for sure. Bradley, what would you add, or
Well, I would nod my head vigorously to that. Even some of the thoughts that were coming to mind, Felicia would say them next as I thought them, like the scaffolding coming down, and that this is about removing constructs, understanding that God, that love is not our conception of God and love, and that a positive sense of deconstruction then can be removing everything that we can, voluntarily or involuntarily, that distorts God as such or love as such, And so we have lots of language for that, lenses, right, that have distorted. And I think if the goal is intimacy, that's a presumption, I guess, but I think it is to experience the union that we have with this ultimate reality who is love. Then deconstruction is very important in terms of. I loved your image of letting go too, because some of these things we really we white knuckled them. I don't know if I want to let go. And so there's that. Maybe some distinctions I'd want to make is that some deconstruction is voluntary. It's something we do, an act of letting go, and then others it's involuntary and it's something we undergo. And in undergoing it, I think that's where some of the trauma can happen. That we have, let's say, religious trauma from the past, but the deconstruction itself is a second trauma. That's one side. And then another side is how incredibly liberating it is when we're able to let go of things that hindered us. And so I know there's a huge range of definitions of deconstruction, and that it did get very poppy, but it's also very ancient, this idea of unknowing. It's every mystical tradition from every major religion and minor ones. What are they doing? The mystical tradition is transcending the religious rituals and structures that were like a scaffolding that was very much meant to orient us to God. But having been oriented to God, and we have an experience, and we're like, okay, I'm going to have to make a choice now. Will I engage God directly if I can't define God so easily anymore, right? And that's the unknowing part. And this is an enormous part of the Bhakti Hinduism and Sufi Islam and the whole Christian mystical tradition.
Yeah, that's good. I think for me, it's felt like both at different times. Like this is something that's happening to me that is really painful and associated with trauma. Yep. And sometimes it's felt more like my intention and willful choice that's been very freeing. And tonight we're talking about healing from and through our deconstruction, because I think it is very much both experienced differently at different times. So I wonder, in what ways have you experienced or observed this to be destructive and not helpful for people? I don't know if you want to switch, Bradley, if you want to start.
Sure, I'll jump in. Yeah, where I see it as potentially destructive is when we go from the frying pan into the fire. Let's say we go out of a toxic faith community into isolation and alienation. I've seen it be destructive, and I get the DMs from people in psych wards where it's like, this felt like a mastectomy. I didn't just lose my religion, I lost my faith. I lost things precious to me, and I've even lost meaning. And so I use the analogy of mastectomy because we recognize that cancer needs to be removed, but we don't always know how much of ourselves we'll lose in the process. And but God can even redeem that, right? And that despair itself can be co-opted in, and that's why I call it out of the embers. It's this inexplicably something comes out of the embers. But for those who get stuck in alienation and can't grope their way back to communion somehow, my first response is just empathy, and to acknowledge that, and not to scold, and to recognize they didn't mean to do this to themselves. And so like gloating somehow as if, that would be really, really, that would just deepen the abuse, right? So Felicia, how about you?
Yeah, Brett, I would totally agree with you. My mind immediately went to when I feel like deconstruction is destructive, when we are as fundamental and certain about deconstruction as we are about religion. That's when it's destructive. And I think about Rene Girard. He spoke often of scapegoating, right? And when we get trapped in the need to blame or our pain or our lived experience on someone or something, someone being that preacher or this person or whatever, or something being the church or, or an organization or whatever, it could be whatever. But when we get trapped in that need to blame, to have a villain, right? Then deconstruction turns vengeful and it turns destructive, particularly if we don't understand that this process is a path to infinite love. And if we don't understand that, then what happens is we get trapped, like Brad was saying, we get trapped in the terror and chaos of unraveling, which can be very harmful. And it is indeed an unraveling, right? And so when you think about freedom, it says that, Jesus set us free. So freedom, that we've been set free, not to be yoked again to bondage. But if you think about the wide open, vast spaces of freedom, there's no walls. There's no, love is the structure in which freedom is governed, right? It has to be through communing and through relationship. And so that's why freedom, it can be scary as hell, because you have to manage yourself through something, and that's through love. And so that's through like surrender and trust. But if we're going into deconstruction with all of these things, the lie that we can control others, that it's our job to fix people or rescue people or save people from themselves, or even if we have a faulty God concept where we view God as a punisher, if we are taking all of these destructive beliefs into the path of disorder instead of yielding to mystery, instead of trusting divine love, then what happens is we want to punish the people who we think is responsible for us, for landing us in this place. Or we want to then turn around and create social media accounts where we rescue everyone else from the church or rescue them from themselves, and essentially we become very do fundamentalistic kind of things. We become very fundamental about our own deconstruction. And that's, that in itself is very destructive. So I think that's where I would end there, just to kind of add to what Brad said.
I'm taking notes as fast as I can.
I'm watching. I'm like, what is he doing?
If I was even faster, I'd be live tweeting right now. This is like gold.
I don't think a lot of us don't come into an environment, a church setting, where we're taught that it's like the seasons, right? We're going into fall now on this side of the hemisphere. And we know that when fall comes, all of the leaves are going to fall from the trees. And then it's going to move from fall into winter, and things are going to go dead, and it's going to get really barren and cold and frigid. But then it's going to cycle to spring, and new life is going to come bursting through that barrenness. And then we're going to move into summer, and it's full green, and it's, and even our journey, our homecoming is like that. We have those seasons, but we are given a religion that's full of certitude, which means, one, we have all the answers. Two, it will never, ever be bad. It's like the Disneyland of spirituality. And so then when we do undergo, or even when we do it with intention, it scares the crap out of us, because we don't know what to do with the fall and winter seasons of our spirituality. Instead of seeing it as an invitation into this part of the journey, and Brad, I think you said it so well, we get trapped in that. And sometimes the stories that we tell ourselves or that we have been told create our own trauma and our own torment.
Oh, wow. So good. Yeah, you just said about 25 amazing things, but there's one thing I want you to say again to make sure I got it. Like, love is the structure in which freedom
is governed.
Yeah. Say that again. One more time.
Love is the structure in which freedom is governed.
Yeah. That's powerful.
See, that's what I was writing down.
Here you go. We're going to all I don't tweet, but it's going to be out there.
Oh yeah. Memes to come.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're already touching on this, but So there is a sense in which deconstruction is necessary for us, right? Like we don't view it as a normal part of our Christian journey, right? Felicia, you were just saying we view like certitude and knowing, right, as the foundation on which we build our faith. And yet there is a reality in which perhaps this is actually a necessary part. And what would it begin to look like if we embrace this as a necessary part of our spiritual journey? So, Bradley, I wonder what your thoughts might be about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the metaphors really help. Like, so let's say if we use the metaphor of growth through seasons, like Felicia was saying, it's like, what are you going to do? Remain an acorn? Or will we crack out of the acorn and become a sprout? Will we remain a sprout? And so on. So we go through these, and it is cycles, because it's not like, well, some people almost treat it like a conversion experience, because it is a form of conversion, but now it's like my new evangelical testimony of deconstruction. And these are seasons that happen in different areas of our lives. And so that's one example of the necessity. But if we also would, let's say, use the analogy of childbirth, earlier, I think Felicia mentioned about what's going to be birthed. And so you think about labor, you think about transition, you think about, we even use the analogy sometimes of that the breaking of the waters of our baptism, and that this is a repeatable experience, right? And so you don't want to get stuck in the birth canal. You don't want to, so that kind of necessity comes about, especially if love is drawing us forward. That's necessary. And part of the thing, what I'm doing in the book, especially with the philosophers, I'm saying it's not that we have gone too far. It's that we've done a half-baked version of deconstruction. And so I do think in terms of death and resurrection. And I also love the idea of metamorphosis that's in the scriptures, which is like going from cocoon to butterfly. All of these things this is a natural, but it feels unnatural because we don't like discomfort. So, yeah.
Yeah. Felicia, what would you add there?
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. I'm gonna get out of white hanky in a minute, and you, man, Brad. And I would agree that if we allow it, deconstruction can be an invitation to die. It's an invitation to die to all that is false within you, including narratives, constructs, interpretations, God concepts. And Brad said that earlier, right? He literally led with, we have these conceptions, but they are not the thing. And I think what happens is we have this invitation to journey with spirit into mystery. And I go back to, as a guide, this is my Saint John of the Cross. This is 1500s. And he literally was, all of his poetry is deconstruction. It is about that, right? But one of the things that he said in Dark Night of the Soul was, the way the soul walks to God is through human unknowing. And so I just think it is the way that we shed all of those things of our intellect and all of that. And it is another one of my teacher, Jim Finley, talks about leaving the boundaries of mediated presence into unmediated presence, where we pass into the love that has from the beginning been passing into us. And so what Brad is trying to say about being stuck in the birth canal is the leaving part, because the mediated presence, particularly if you've been in the church, is reading your Bible every day, is going to church every Sunday, listening to the preacher, is, the worship songs, is all of these things. And none of those things are bad. It's not about bad or good or any of that. It's just, these are vehicles that we have used to touch, to have a tactile sense of Jesus, to have a tactile sense of wonder. And what spirit begins to do is to like grow us up, essentially, is to draw us from that place of needing a mediator to enter into the presence, to say, presence has always been with you. Come with me. Let me show you how we are one. But if we get stuck, still, white knuckling, still clenching onto everything we know to be true about what we know to be true, which is how we experience God, then we never go through the birthing process to get to that unmediated eternal communion, which is all that we're really being invited into. But people aren't preaching this. Instead, they're preaching against the idea as if it's something bad, and it really doesn't have to be. As scary as it, no one's denying that, right? Because that's part of mystery, is you don't know. But do you trust? And that was Jesus on the cross. It's dark. And he says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. So I may not know, but I can trust. Do I trust?
Just a footnote about Samson. It's interesting that you see him in the cruciform. It's prefiguring the greater, deeper, more powerful, and more loving and deconstruction that happens at the cross. But it's absolutely prefiguring it. And I've not yet heard a sermon on that. So maybe Felicia or I will do that sometime.
And I'll just add something that St. John of the Cross says. I think it's in the Canticles, not in, most people are familiar with his Dark Night of the Soul work, which they totally see as a thing of suffering. And it is a very sensual love poem to the divine. But in the Canticles, he says, God heals the soul by killing her.
Ooh.
God heals the soul by killing her. And the first time I read it, I immediately thought of cruciform. I thought of the healing of the world through that experience of Jesus dying on the cross. But I know that, I don't know, because I wasn't in the 1500s, but to me, my mind immediately jumped to just this picture of what that death did as far as healing for all of us,
Yep.
Oh, this is so good. One of the metaphors, Bradley, you were talking about metaphors that have been helpful for me is the metaphor of the wilderness, right? And you find yourself out in this expansive place where the boundaries are pushed way, way, way out, like you can't see them anymore. And at first that felt to me like I'm just wandering around aimlessly. And I heard Barbara Brown Taylor actually talking about it recently. And she said, well, you're in the wilderness because there are things there that can kill you. Like, otherwise you're in a park. Right?
That's really good.
The point of the wilderness is that is there are things there that will like kill us, but the dying, right, of self is the intention, really. And then in the wilderness, we find these beautiful ancient paths that are actually already carved out for us in some way, St. John of the Cross and others who've walked this way, and we can begin, to find ways to walk in this very liminal, expansive, undefined space of becoming. But I'd love to talk a little bit more about what we've missed, right, in our Western, more perhaps evangelical experience in our theology that has created this need for this death, this cruciformity that we're talking about. And Bradley, I think or maybe Felicia already alluded to one of these, which is you don't have it, right? It's outside of you. You don't have it. Maybe you can't have it, and you have to work really hard to have it. But I wonder for you, what have we missed that's created this need for this time in history, right, where this great deconstruction seems to be happening all around us and within us.
Felicia's turn first this time.
Yeah, Felicia.
My first thought is just kind of to what you were saying, Susan, there at the end, is in our society, in our Western society, we have a mindset of prolonging life. We really have not been taught how to embrace dying or to embrace death. And I think about indigenous practices and indigenous beliefs. There's such an honoring of the circle of life, of even the way natives honor or kill when they have to, or when they do kill an animal for meat, right? And there's an honoring to the practice that is so beautiful in the circle of life. And and so I just wonder if that is something that we've missed, even um, the way that we really don't know how to embrace dying. There's still that fear of that. But I think a lot of times about Joseph Campbell and how he spoke of the hero's journey. And so for me, I think one of the things that we may have missed in the evangelical experience is the ontological, or perhaps maybe even apocalyptic journey, which is one of coming home to love, where the veil is lifted so that we are able to see the truth of our being, to use our friend Paul Young's words, and our oneness with the divine, right? And so if we understand this process of, Father Richard Rohr would always say, order, disorder, reorder. If we could understand this journey as a homecoming of sorts, or I use apocalyptic just because it means to lift the veil or to reveal. And so, you know, if we had that part in our evangelical experience to understand that a little bit more, maybe we wouldn't be so afraid of it. But that said, we do have this kind of mindset in the Western evangelical experience where we're serving to the point of burnout. We're doing, people are to be used, to be consumed. We want to save them so they become, projects. And so then what happens when we enter deconstruction, all of those attachments are stripped away, and it leaves us with nothing else to do, nowhere else to be. And if we're lucky, we can trust love enough to understand that love is leading us somewhere or into something. Um, but if we're not, then that's where it gets really kind of scary and funky. And so again, I just go back to, I think one of the things that we've missed is how we take the journey to living, and that journey of homecoming to love.
Yeah, very good. I'm all in for that stuff for sure. Totally agree. I had a few other streams flowing at the same time in my mind. One was the way in which modernity co-opted evangelicalism, and here's how I see that happening. So in the 1800s, we start making discoveries in terms of science, for example. Rationalism, all these things that came out of the Enlightenment that brought a superstitious kind of faith into the light and made it look pretty bad. And so the evangelical response was to confront that, but inside the modernist courtroom. So now we're going to use counter science to prove the world is 7,000 years old, and that Noah's Ark floated over Everest, and it was a so we got we accepted the terms of the debate, and that became our faith. So we moved from being witnesses of the good news of an experience of divine love into lawyering in the same way. So by the time I was growing up, we thought, and I want to say we in a narrow way, this isn't the whole movement, but I didn't know the difference between apologetics and evangelism, because I thought you argue people into the kingdom of God. And so what was the fruit of that? Well, I was told if I prayed a certain prayer, I would have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. But and I did, but that was kind of lucky. And I'll come back to that in a moment, because what was really, it seemed to me, was being sold is you can have certitude about an idea. And if you accept this idea, which is a construct, then you're a Christian, and you accept this idea of God, and by praying this prayer and then trying to be good so it got moralistic despite our objections about it being grace alone. And it was all just very contorted. And so I think what was happening for me is I heard a lot about the idea of Jesus. And when deconstruction happens, or let's say trauma happens, or a better idea seems to come along that's a little more titillating or novel or deep, we can surrender one idea for the next. And I see this happening a lot with folks where they've left they've left Christian faith and Jesus is just another idea they let go of. It's like, have you never met him? And if not, that's not on them. It's like, how did we fail to facilitate a living connection that they already have? So I'm really concerned about that. Is in my own I don't know what you call it, like call it a ministry, is like, can I facilitate a living an experience of the living connection that's not just another experience that can be replaced by the next experience. This is tricky stuff, right? But isn't it wonderful that we already have one? And so this is about opening our eyes to that. So that would be one thing I feel like we could have missed. And I said, I did have that. I remember that even in a fundamentalist Baptist home, my dear mother led me to pray in a way that I experienced the presence of Jesus. And it wasn't dramatic and it wasn't charismatic, but it was very, very real. And I'm like, how did that happen? Was that just luck, or is there some way we could bring people into that kind of communion on, like, so that the truth of who they are gets to be accessible to them? I don't know. I'm kind of rambling now, but that's where that feels like a big reason why so many have made their exodus, because they didn't have that. They had an idea.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and it's such a big part of what we do as a ministry, right? We exist to help people encounter Jesus. And for me, that was the anchor that held me that continues to hold me through this whole continual extended period of deconstruction. Is I can walk away from ideas, but I can't walk away from what I know by experience.
Yeah, I am very honest about, had I not had an encounter with the divine as love, that it would have been, and I would have to honestly name that as the Trinity, not just Jesus. It was Father, Jesus, Spirit, right? And so it would have been very easy for me to become an atheist and a lot of things that happened on my journey. But having had not just one kind of encounter, but this is my living witness, this, and that is the anchor that tied me, was God as relationship, right? And so I knew, and things that were happening, everything else might not be true, but this is true. This I know, on this I can depend, on this I can count, and I can go back to it. And now, having read and experienced multiple religions, I actually see that. I see source. I see the divine weaving in multiple places. But when all we know is what we know, we think it has to look like this, and we think it has to be called this. And I'm just telling you that Jesus loves the world, and that's not just Christianity.
Yep.
I know that too. I believe that with all of my heart.
Absolutely.
That's so good. I feel like there's preaching coming on here in a minute.
Let me just add one thing now because this is super important. Now that you mentioned other faiths, like because a third of my city are people of the Sikh faith, I felt like it's important for me to read their scriptures. I'm about 80% of the way through now. It's like 80 hours on an audiobook. And one of the things they say is our biggest, the seed of all sin, they say, is dualism. And they have 3 levels of it that they're describing. One is this belief that we are separate from God. The second is the belief that my body is separate from my soul. And the third is that I am separate from you, that you're the us and them thing. And evangelical theology was based on separation theology, that you are born separated from God. And now there's this series of things we do or prescribe for you to and we kind of talk that way in terms of coming home, but what are we coming home to? Well, we're coming home to the one who's never disowned us. In fact, we're turning to the one who's never left us. In fact, the one we're turning to is in us, you know? I was just in a 12-step meeting where it was the most amazing thing. We talked about our higher power, and a pagan guy said, I don't know what God is or isn't. I don't know what or who God is or isn't, but I know this. We need a personal relationship, and that God is in me, and he's way bigger than me, and he's here right now, and that's what's transforming us. I'm like, that's pretty good. That's a better message than I've often heard, you know, because he's assuming union. And this is the proclamation of the good news, that God is united to every man, woman, and child and thing in the universe. And we're not separate from God, but we do experience real alienation to the degree that we believe that. So, yeah.
Wow. That's so good. So as we think about union and experience, I'm wondering what can help us in this heal, to the extent that this has been experienced as trauma. What can help us heal, but what can help us emerge into this place of growing communion and union with God and with one another? Yeah, Felicia, I don't know if you want to kick us off on that. It's all connecting. The threads here are beautiful.
Yeah, I think for me, my answer would be to trust the work of love, and in a deeper sense, I'm going to go back to the wisdom of Saint John of the Cross, and there's a passage in the Canticles that I kind of, when I hit these spots, I go to it. I have it underlined. But he says, if I can just share it, "O spiritual soul, when you see that your desires are darkened, your inclinations dried up, and your faculties incapacitated, do not be disturbed. Consider it grace. God is freeing you from yourself. Never before could you labor as effectively as you can now when you put down your burden and let God take your hand and guide you through the darkness as though you were blind, leading you to a place you do not know." And every time I read it, I just think, if I can open my hands and open my heart and say yes to the work of love, that is grace.
For those who don't know, Canticles is Song of Solomon, right? So it's really good to read dead people. So St. John of the Cross, Canticles, it's a mystical commentary on the Song of Solomon. Definitely get that. If you have to choose between that and my book, definitely get that one. But you don't have to choose.
Is the most important word, Bradley. And get the collected works of St. John of the Cross, which includes the Canticles, and definitely get Out of Embers.
Yeah, and in terms of important things, the way my godfather put it, I have a chapter at least on this. My godfather, David Goa, he says, the kingdom of God is presence in communion. And so it's not heaven when you die someday. It is this experience of presence in communion. And so this looks different for different people, right? So for me, that's often my times in solitude with God, where I am trusting myself to love, especially my most troubled parts. I've at least learned that, to bring my most troubled parts into his presence, but or her presence, depending on how I experience God in that moment. So usually it's not an it, though. It's very personal. But my wife is quite different. I asked her, like, do you experience presence in communion? She's every day. I'm like, tell me about it. And every single example she have is a connection with another human being. So that's interesting, because I experience that too, but it's a matter of emphases in our lives, right? So it's like, I need presence in communion. I'll probably go walk in the bird sanctuary. If she needs it, she'll go have coffee with a friend. And it's we're experiencing love, right? It's the grace of divine love embodied in those who see us. So.
Yeah. And it seems to me, but not to oversimplify, but that is at least one of perhaps many invitations coming to us through what feels like a larger work that Trinity, Father, Holy Spirit, Jesus, is doing on the planet right now, and in multiple ways, in the church, culturally, for us individually, that invitation to live more and more, or to return to that place of union, communion with one another. And Bradley, in just a minute or two, you're going to lead us in a practice that maybe will open some space for us to do that. But before then, you talk a little bit, and Felicia, you make a contribution to the book, and you make the point that it's important to listen to marginalized voices as we sort of consider all of this. And so I wonder how is that helpful to us? Why is that important? And if that's not something we're doing now, how might we begin to do that? Felicia, do you want to? I actually have something I could read that you wrote, if that would be helpful, but I'd rather just hear you talk.
If they're not articulate enough, definitely read. But Brad and I have had this conversation before as well. For me, my first thought is, I am looking for the voices of love. Who is in communion with love, right? And so I'm going to go there. I also think that it is, I'm remembering an old African proverb that talks about essentially the story is different when told by the hunter versus when it's told by the prey. And so it is important, because every narrative that we have in the world today is layered and is complex. We see this even around the Queen, rest her soul. And people have been very upset that a lot of marginalized people have been pointing out the colonization at a time like this, which has nothing to do with the person. It has a lot to do with the systems, right? And so it's very easy to miss the impact of how systems and societal things affect the marginalized, unless we are in communion with them, unless we are in relationship. When my world is very homogenous, I don't think about how someone else is affected. But I do think about the people that I care about. I'm going to think about how my spouse is affected by something. I'm going to think about how my parents are affected. I'm going to think about how my children are affected. I'm going to think about my bank account even. I'm going to think about the things that matter to me. And a lot of times, if I am not in a direct kind of relationship with a person of color, a queer person, a person from another country, those things don't mean as much to me. They're very on the peripheral. They're not as important to me. But all of a sudden now, because Brad and I have relationship. There's mutuality and there's reciprocity. Now, hopefully, when something happens, he's going to think about how that affects me, and I'm going to think about how that affects him, right? And so now I'm going to come to a situation with a little bit more care and concern. And for me, when I read Howard Thurman, when I read Cornel West, when I read even Audre Lorde or James Baldwin or Layla Saad, or, you know, when I read people that are able to bring language and insight that I may not understand, because a lot of times our worlds are just our worlds, and we just don't have friendships across divides and across chasms. But through reading, through YouTube, through listening, through podcasts, it can introduce us at least to some perspectives that we may not be receiving. You know, for me, that was beyond people of color. When you talk about deconstruction and life on the other side, I moved from just my normal sources that I was currently listening to Father Richard Rohr, to Barbara Brown Taylor, as you've mentioned, to Mirabai Starr. There were other, to James Finley. I'm looking for, when I listen to Paul Young, I know that there has been a kiss between he and the divine. I know it, right? And I can recognize it. I recognize it in his person, just the energy of it when I'm around him. And because I recognize the kiss, I can submit myself to the voice. And sometimes with the marginalized, there's, in the discomfort of hearing something different, there's a lot of anger and a lot of bite. And a lot of that is passion that we just misinterpret as anger. But if you still yourself enough, you can also hear a kiss and a longing to be seen, to be heard, you know. So I'll just offer that for an importance of listening to marginalized voices. But I was really, really glad that Brad included, and not just the Black perspective. I felt like in the book he did a beautiful job of expanding that to even a global perspective of, this is the body, this is what that looks like, you know, these are some voices. So I was very appreciative of that.
Well, and I was thankful that Felicia could help me, especially with that section of the book, because I am aware of the great problems that come up with speaking for the other. And so when it came down to that, at least my posture was, I wanted to sit at Felicia's feet and to say, am I hearing this right? Am I hearing you right? Not just, and then she put me onto these amazing mentors, right? Like, especially Howard Thurman, but I don't think I can be trusted with Howard Thurman by myself. I need a living mentor to help me read him. And so she's done that. Valerie Carr, she put me on to, who, by the way, now our entire faculty at the university is reading through See No Stranger as a, and it wasn't even my idea. And I'm like, what? This is awesome. And so when I read, especially Thurman, Jesus and the Disinherited, I recognized that there was this parallel or an analogy, or maybe it's a reality that the book of Hebrews says, let us go out to him outside the camp. And so what I have been observing, and especially in American Christianity, is just about a complete loss of Christianity, a loss of love, to the point where I despaired. It's like, do we even have a gospel preached in America anymore? And where would it be? And then I read it in Howard Thurman, and I'm like, well, this makes sense, because the cross was outside the city. That the gospel is proclaimed from outside the camp, and that the very center of the gospel will actually be where socially what we consider the margins is the home base of the gospel. So that's kind of where I was coming at from it. And I looked at also James Cone, and in the 20th century, but then also this series of martyrs. The great martyrs of Christian history speak to us the gospel from outside the temples and parliaments of power. So I was enthusiastic about that when I saw it, because I'm like, oh, good. So the gospel is not lost. You just have to go find it. And that's where I found it. So
that's so
I'm
good.
grateful too, because Felicia always, like, I know that on the outside, in the margins, there are also voices of hate. But she's tuned me into hearing the lament underneath it. And then also that, like, no, not everyone who's been victimized knows the good news of love, but there are mentors out there who can help us. And even in the midst of what, we're very vulnerable right now in the white community to become performative progressives as a way of massaging our own egos.
Yes.
And I don't even dare call myself an ally. That's not for me to decide. We'll let my neighbors and those around me decide that. But I know this, whatever, to the degree that I'm an ally, I'm not a very good one, but I have some good friends. And so I must say, absolutely depend on Felicia and Doug in ways that they'd probably be uncomfortable with, but at least we're friends. So. Yeah.
That's so good. You guys, we could talk a whole lot longer about this, but I kind of love ending here because I think this invitation is personal for each of us, but it's also relational, and the oneness and the communion and union that God is, I think, inviting us back to through all these things that are deconstructing in us and around us is for union with God, but also for union and oneness with one another. And so the more that we can move towards that with intention to outside the city gates, the closer we're going to get. So thank you. Bradley, I would love for you to lead us in a practice step that's going to help us all sort of just move into that place. We've been talking, but let's see how Holy Spirit might move us into a place of experience.
Okay. So what I'd like to do today is specific to the burdens and traumas, the anxieties, whatever has lodged in our body, soul, and spirit that can create stuckness. And so I do have an approach that helps me, and it's helped my family. It's helped others who've come through this. And so I'll just walk you through it. And a lot of it is a series of questions, but we'll start with presence, right? So I'd welcome you to, and then anybody who listens to this. Did you know you can come into the presence of God on purpose? And so whoever or whatever God is or isn't, that one who is love is in you. And in the Christian tradition, if that looks like coming to Father, to Spirit, or to Jesus, I welcome you there. But even in the Christian tradition, we have fire, we have wind, we have water, we have lions, we have eagles, we have lambs, we have chickens. Like so. So I'm going to ask infinite love to just give you a picture or a sense of what God's presence would look like for you. And maybe I'll be even a little more leading. I'd invite you to look into the face of love, to the eyes of love. Even if that's just a metaphor in this moment. But we're face to face with the one who sees, the one who hears, the one who loves. And I invite you to bring your most troubled part of who you are, part that may be carrying a burden today, a painful memory, an old trauma, or even some fresh anxiety, whatever would. When I come to my confessor, that's what he asked. He said, "What's troubling you today?" And let's start with an emotional word. If you could identify the very best word to describe that feeling, what might it be? Maybe you don't have one. That's okay. Then you can intercede for those who do. But if a part of you is troubled today, what's the best word or label for that? And so often we've made this very ethereal, and we forgot how this affects even our bodies. So the next thing I'd like to do is I'd like to ask you, where do you carry this emotion in your body? Just let yourself feel that, or remember where you carry it. Is it your head, your jaw, your throat, your shoulders, your heart, your gut, your fists? Wherever you feel it most, just take a moment to see that, to feel that. And then if something comes to mind, that I'm going to ask the Lord to open the eyes of your heart to see what that thing would look like when it's lodged in your body. Is it a yoke on your shoulders? Is it a clamp on your temples? Is it a shadow in your heart? Is it an anchor in your gut? Like God loves to use imagery to help us identify these things and how they sit in us. So if you could just think about that for a moment and picture it vividly if you're able. Of course, this is different for everyone. So don't let me impose, but I'm just giving, from my experience, different kinds of expressions that it takes. I am quite sure that some listening to this will experience it as chains. That'd be like a good example that we can see in the scriptures. So as you think about how that thing lodges in your body and in your heart or your soul, the next question I'd have is, what has it cost you to carry that there through the years or in this moment? What's it cost you? What's it cost you in your relationships? What's it cost you in your well-being, in your peace? Some say it's cost them everything. But I know this, when something like that, when we carry it for any length of time, it becomes costly. It's not bad to feel anger or hurt or grief, or in fact, it's important. But when we carry it ourselves for any length of time, these things have a way of morphing into something oppressive. And then maybe one more question about that. What is it up to? If you think about this burden or this thing we're carrying, is there something insidious going on with that where like this is about shutting you down, for example? This is about silencing you. This is about arresting your dance, and so on. What's it up to? I don't think these things are benign by the time it gets this to this, and we would just really want freedom. So I brought all this up in the presence of divine love, because now we can say, let's ask him this, or ask her this. Love, if I were to give this to you, if I were to let go of it, if I were to let you have it, what gift would you give me in exchange? And just see what love says or what love shows you. It might be a replacement image, but whatever it is, it's an upgrade. I can guarantee that. If love would give you that gift today, what would be on the plate for you? So by now we just say, well, okay, I have this burden and I see this gift. Would you want to make an exchange? This is very Pauline language, isn't it? Or Isaiah, I give him my spirit of heaviness and he gives me a garment of praise. I give him my ashes and he gives me the oil of gladness, that kind of thing. So we come to make this exchange now. And so you have to listen very carefully to the prayer we're going to pray together. It's only 2 words though. Yes, please. Or here's a more complicated one. 4 words. You can have it. You can have it. And so if that's in your heart, you just go ahead and tell him that. I'll pray for you now, and I want you to watch what happens. I want you to feel what happens to the best you can participate. And this may happen in a moment, or it may be the rest of your day or week, right? So I don't mean for it to be a drive-through when it's not, but sometimes we'll see him initiate and even complete things very quickly if they're ripe. Abba, Amma, Spirit, Jesus, you can have it. And God, I thank you that you have revealed yourself as love, even by bearing our wounds. And so I ask that the wounded hands of love would now be laid on that very place in our bodies where we carry that burden. So just let them do that. That those wounded hands that bear your wounds would be laid on your burden. And now I ask, Lord, that you would draw out the toxins of that wound. I pray that you would drain out what needs to be drained, lift off what needs to be lifted off, break what needs to be broken, deconstruct every construct that needs to go now in Jesus' name. And that from those same wounds that you'd pour in healing love into our body, soul, and spirit, from our heads to our toes, into our hearts and into that wound, that the cleansing love, that's unselfish love, that co-suffering love, that cruciform love would flush out and wash off and cleanse the residue of what we've been carrying. And so just go ahead and let him do that. And I feel like he'll just continue doing that. One other thing, though, is that often these things have happened with or because of somebody else. So if there's someone you've harmed or they've harmed you or you've sinned with them, whatever it is, right? We have a million ways of attaching ourselves to folks, and that they have rent space in our hearts, or even people we love where we need to hand them over every day and we forgot to hand them over, so we just bring that person into the presence now, and we offer them into the loving care of God. Lord, would instead of just clinging to them or dropping them, we put them into your loving hands. You can have them. You can hold them. You can carry them. And even watching God do that in your heart is a kind of intercession that releases grace to that person. And then we just retreat now into love itself. Lord, just hold us today. Hold us in your care. Seal whatever you've done. finish whatever you want. Make us whole. In Jesus' name, amen. Sue always has a moment, so we have to just take time to bring her back from wherever.
I'm back.
I'm back. Yeah. Welcome back.
That was, yes, I did have a moment. Thank you. That was beautiful, Bradley. Thank you for leading us. Thank you both for being with us on this very important evening for this very important conversation. Really grateful. We're going to let people know how to be connected with both of you. Just follow both of them on Instagram for starters. It's a great place. And go buy their books. We'll be giving some of them away. So I just want to say thank you and bless both of you. Thank you for the gifts that you are to me, and thank you for the encouragement that you give to my life and to this ministry that we're doing here at Roots and Branches.
It was such a delight. Thanks for having me.
That was fun.
It was fun. All right. Bless you guys.
All right.
Good night. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope this time has been meaningful for you. Thanks so much again for taking just a moment to make your financial gift to Roots and Branches. We're grateful for your support. We'd love to journey with you. You can connect with us, work with us, find our resources, and even book a personal session with us at rootsandbranchesnetwork.com. We bless you to live deeply rooted in love. When we pray with folks, we try to create a noise-free, shame-free, formula-free environment. Often we don't even know what's in our own hearts or in our own stories until we get quiet and someone listens to us well, and all of a sudden we see it again and again in sessions. People start making connections and seeing things that they just couldn't see because it's too loud, right, in life. Listening opens that place for safe connection to happen. And that's the place where we can facilitate an encounter with Jesus. And that place of encounter, God invites a response. And in that response is where transformation happens. So we talk about connecting people with Jesus for transformational encounters. Our true self has gotten covered over, buried under a lot of stuff, under trauma, wounding, disappointments of life. And we're, in a sense, in a process of removing those things so that the true self, what's true about us, that perfect, holy us, is more and more revealed. It's not that people aren't trying. It's that we're not connected with God, who is love.